Night Bible study. Tonight we're going to go ahead with our study in the book of John that we've been going through. This will be the last one. So I'm working on some other stuff, but I wanted to go ahead with this tonight. We had a good discussion last week, and I had kind of thought about picking that discussion back up. We'll save that. I wanted to go ahead and go to this study tonight, and this will finish us up in this series on conversations with Jesus through the Gospel of John. And this will be Jesus and Peter tonight in John 21. So we'll take a look at this tonight. Let's go ahead and we'll go to some scripture in John 21. Because after these things, and these things he's talking about here is Jesus' resurrection and his appearing to his disciples there in the upper room a couple of times and those kind of things. After those things, he showed himself again to the disciples at the Sea of Tiberias. And on this wise showed he himself. There were together Simon Peter and Thomas called Didymus and Nathanael of Cana in Galilee and the sons of Zebedee and two other of his disciples. Now, this is of course Peter, Thomas, which is possibly could have been Matthew's brother. Not sure, but anyway, he was, of course, one of the disciples there. And then you remember Nathanael. Here's Nathanael here with this group of 7 of the disciples. We don't know where the other 4 were. Remember, Judas is dead by now, so there are only 11 of the original disciples alive at this time, and they haven't added Matthias to the group. That would be a little later after Pentecost. Nathanael, remember we started off this series talking about Nathanael. And some of the things that we discussed with Nathanael, if you remember, were the things that he knew about Scripture and about prophecy and about the Messiah. And that Jesus' interaction with him showed him how that Jesus knew things that only God could have known. And that so affected Nathanael that he made the statements that he did. So think about Nathanael at this time and Peter and these other men, how they're affected by what has happened after all that they looked forward to, all that Jesus had taught them about the kingdom coming in and their part in it and all these things. And now apparently that seemed like it had all fallen apart. So here are 7 of them up here back in Galilee. Let's look at what happened. Verse 3, Simon Peter saith unto them, I go a-fishing. They say unto him, we also go with thee. They went forth and entered into a ship immediately, and that night they caught nothing. Now, here's these 7 disciples, Peter and Thomas and Nathanael, James and John, and 2 others. We don't know who the 2 others were. Don't know why they're not named here. Maybe it doesn't really make a lot of difference, but they're not. Anyway, 7 of them here, and they go back up here, and they're in Galilee. So we could ask the question, okay, why did these guys go back fishing? Was it because, well, they were fishermen, and they're up there with nothing else to do? Or could there be some other, reasons behind it? I tend to think it's probably because that was what they did, and they were there, didn't really have anything else to do, so they, well, let's go back fishing. There could be some other reasons why they just went back to fishing. One reason is, we can look at, is that they had received no further instructions from Jesus. When he appeared to them in the upper room, basically all he wanted them to understand was the verification that he was indeed alive. He appeared to them, kind of rebuked them for their lack of faith and unbelief, and said, touch me, see me, I'm real, I'm flesh and bone, it's me. He asked them for something to eat. They brought him some food, he ate it, to show them he was a real, genuine, physical person, but that he had been resurrected. Other than that, he really didn't give them any instructions at this time as far as what to do. So it could be that since these men hadn't received any further instructions, they didn't know what else to do, they went fishing. We've got to keep in mind also their point of view and what they knew from the Scriptures. You know, they understood fully what had happened. Israel had rejected their Messiah, rejected their king, and had rejected the offer of the kingdom. Consequently, the next event in the prophetic plan for Israel, and they well knew this, was God's judgment and wrath. And then after that, the Messiah would come and throw off his enemies. But there would be, you know, the Daniel's 70th week to come, and those things of what we understand as the tribulation, and those things that were prophesied to happen. Mainly God's day of wrath. That's what they were looking for next. They hadn't received the Holy Spirit yet, and they hadn't been given what we call the Great Commission, which was their commission to go into all the world and preach the gospel to every creature. That was to them. They hadn't received any of that yet, none of those instructions yet. So after all that they'd been through, they may not have been sure just exactly what to do. They may have believed that their discipleship had come to an end in failure, and as far as the kingdom was concerned, as far as God's plan for them, their discipleship and their following Christ, they may have assumed that, well, it's all over. We failed. We flunked at what we were given to do. You know, even though He's resurrected, the kingdom's not going to come in. And so there may have been a lot of confusion and uncertainty there among these men, not really knowing what to do. They said, well, let's go fishing. So down to the boat they went. They got in and they went fishing. There were some other things, prophetic things they were looking at to possibly happen. They knew they were always under the threat of Roman destruction, because there were so many rebellions beginning to go on during this time. A lot of people calling out for the overthrow of Rome and the independence of Israel and so forth. Well, these things would culminate in like 70 AD, and then again like 135 AD. A couple of rebellions there that ended up with Israel being destroyed, the Jews scattered all over the world and being totally dominated by Rome and taken over by Rome. Jerusalem destroyed, and all those things happened. So this is kind of the situation we find these guys. So here they go, went down a ship, got in there, went out, set everything up, and they didn't catch anything. So let's look at some things here. You can see in this photo, it's not a great photo. I probably should have picked another one. This is a little bit dark. And I'm not sure what happened here. I think that maybe, I don't know what happened here. Anyway, all right. You see these stones here that look like heart-shaped stones? What these are anchor stones. And I'll try to describe what was told to us, how it was described to us, how these were used. These are ancient fishing boat anchor stones. And what they would do, and all right, first let me give you a little bit of background. Of course, this is Galilee. The lake level in Jesus and Peter and those guys' time, they estimate, and they're, I mean, almost indisputably estimate that the lake was about 40 feet deeper than it is now. So this and where we're all standing out here, this would all have been underwater. These stones and this shore or beach area would have probably been under about maybe 8 or 10 feet of water of where it is. So it was deeper then. What they did is they took these anchor stones and they would float them offshore and sink them down there in a line. They had a way that they would either put like stakes or anchor lines in these stones. Now, why they're heart-shaped, I don't know. And I don't think Moshe knew either. They don't know why they heart-shaped them. There hadn't been a reason why they did that. They're all the same size in the same shape. So everything about these stones was deliberately done that way for some reason. But anyway, they would take these, float them offshore, and sink them out there, and they would anchor their boats to these stones in a line, like coming out from the shore or a ways out from the shore, and they would take several boats and they would anchor them kind of in a row out there. And then they would let their nets down off of the shore side of the boat. And they would do this at night because, if I remember these details right, the fish that they were trying to catch would come up into the shallower water as it got close to dark. So as the fish came up into the shallower water, and then they would go out there as it got dark and anchor out there in a line and let down their nets, and they would have people on shore that would come in there and run the fish back out from the shore out toward the boats. And when all the fish swim out to the nets, they would pull the nets up and catch the fish. So this is why, you know, how they use nets. One way that they use their nets. There are probably other ways too, but this is one way they use their nets, and why they were, you know, pretty accustomed to, you know, hauling in the nets with a lot of fish. So anyway, this may have been what Peter and Nathaniel and these other guys, 7 guys, were doing. They were out there and they had maybe other boats and they were lined up, or they had a boat and other fishermen had their boats out there, and so on. They had their nets and trying to catch the fish. So they did this all night and didn't catch any. They did also go out in their boats, you know, individually with nets and put them out and try to catch fish. But anyway, I wanted to show you this picture. This is one way that they fish there with these. That's what these are, the big anchor stones. So, and whether they use this method or not, these guys knew what they were doing. They were professionals at it. And so for them to have not caught anything all night was a little unusual for them. But we kind of know the rest of the story, and we know that was probably engineered by the Lord to show them that this is not what they're supposed to do. They, you know, when He called them to leave all that behind, and it was for a purpose for them to leave it behind. He had something else for them to do. And really, it kind of should have been encouraging for those guys, and maybe a reminder to them that our work is not over. Maybe there is something else for us to do. I wonder why I ended up with that black box right there. Odd. These are the remains of Capernaum, where Jesus lived and where Peter lived. Fishing village in 1st century, and these are the remains of the 1st century town. So these buildings, these remains of streets and things, this is where Jesus and Peter would have been and would have lived. This is, you notice how dark these rocks are. The rock there is a dark, kind of a basalt type of rock. It's kind of a heavy, you know, dense type of rock, volcanic sort of a rock, and that's, the whole country is made out of it, and that's what they built everything out of. So this is some remains of Capernaum, ancient Capernaum.
Were you able to walk all through there?
Some of that you could. Most of this area you couldn't, because it wasn't an active archaeological site, but it was a preserved site. After they had excavated it, they really didn't want anybody going in there because, and I'll show you in a second the reason why. There are artifacts there that they didn't want disturbed. And another reason is that they didn't want people even picking up rocks from there. And here's one of the things that in the tourist or archaeological sites, tourist sites, historical sites, well-known sites all over Israel, everybody that goes there wants to pick up a rock and take it home with them. Not that we would. We did where we had permission to pick up rocks. But anyway, if they let everybody just go through there, but by the time there wouldn't be anything there, because they're people just picking up a rock and taking it with them, there wouldn't be anything left. So that's the reason why they restrict access to these areas, and they don't let you just go in and walk around, because there are some really good artifacts left there. This is one site that when they excavated it, they really didn't take much out. They took some artifacts out to study and catalog and put in museums and things, but a lot of they just left there. Well, I had another thought that escaped me, so we'll move on. Now, this is a site of the synagogue in Capernaum, but what do you notice different about this synagogue over the rest of the remains of the buildings here?
Different color stone.
The different colored stone. This is limestone, and this is basalt. There's no limestone anywhere near there. So all of the limestone for this synagogue was brought in later. This is about a 4th century synagogue. It's built over the site of the 1st century synagogue. And remember that when they went in to excavate all of this, it was just ground level. There really wasn't anything above ground level, except some of this ruin. This was a landmark that they used to identify the site and then kind of map out the rest of the city excavation. Some of this synagogue had been, or has been, reconstructed from the scattered remnants that they found there that they could put back together. But this is a synagogue built in about the 4th century over the site of the 1st century synagogue that would have been there when Jesus was there. And so this is not the synagogue Jesus and Peter went in. They never went in this one, because it wasn't there about 300 years after they were there. So, but it's an interesting thing, and how it gives a good example of how an ancient synagogue was set up. And the Greek and Roman influence and stuff like that is unmistakable there. But still, it's obviously a Jewish synagogue, and interesting how it was set up. So, interesting thing there. Here, anybody guess what? Yeah, that's a grain mill. I forgot about that. Now you'll notice these two pieces are made out of basalt, that stone that they have there. This part fits down over that part. You notice this is cone shaped, so this part fits down over that part, and then you notice a kind of a square hole in here with a round hole right there. Well, you've got the same thing over here. So what they would do is take handles and put in each side of that grain mill and put a pin in there, and then two people would walk round and round, probably kids. They probably made kids do it. And they would pour the grain in here, and as they went round and round, it would grind on that cone shape. So this is one of the types of grain mills they use, and it's really common. We always see them with the pictures and drawings, and they had some of these with the the round stone they'd pour the grain in the middle, and they're sitting there going round and round like that. You actually see very few of those in any of the archaeological sites or museums. Generally, a lot of the grain mills look like this, or they were like we think of a metate like that. That's kind of how some of their grain grinding mills were. It's possible that this grain mill could have been used to grind grain, make bread that Jesus and Peter ate. It's in Capernaum around 1st century time. So, that's what they used to grind their grain, make their bread. You ever think about it? It took a lot of work to make bread back in those days. I mean, from the time of sowing, and reaping and thrashing and grinding and all. It took a lot of work to make bread. Well, bread
a lot of work to even make the.
Yeah, I mean, think about that. Taking a block of stone and making these two objects. You had to know what you were doing. Because if it was me, I'd get about right here trying to cut this hole through there and crack the whole thing and fall apart. That'd be my deal. But yeah, you really had to know what you were doing to work these stones. And some of the stone work that they did in ancient times is just amazing at the skill they had and, you know, their ability to work stone. There's an olive press. And here again, I mean, it took a lot of work. This is carved out of one single piece of stone here. Take a boulder and, you know, carve the top off flat, and then carve out this trough in here with this stone pillar coming right up through the middle. And this is the big wheel, and you'd have a long, like a pole or like a beam that would go in there that would pivot in that hole in that stone pillar. And then you'd have a donkey or something that would walk round and round and round and roll this big wheel round and round inside that mill, and put the olive oil in there, and the olives in there. It would go around and grind the olives. And most of these had a little hole in the side where the olive oil would run out, and they'd catch it in a stone basin and all those kind of things. So that's an olive press there in Capernaum. You can see another one of the grain mills, a broken one up there. So anyway, a lot of those artifacts are there. You can see, and they used back in those days. This is a lousy photograph I took of the Jesus boat, and none of our photos of that came out good, and I don't know why they didn't. But anyway, this boat, or remnants of this boat, were found in, I think, 2002, I believe. A couple of amateur archaeologists out on the shore of Galilee were looking around there for artifacts during a kind of a drought year. Lake level was down low. So they found some, if I remember this right, some pieces of pottery, some nails, and some pieces of rotten wood that they recognized as being 1st century era. So as they got to excavating there in the mud, they found more wood, and they found more wood, and they excavated enough to realize that this was some kind of a structure, and the construction of this object that they could see was a boat. So they immediately contacted archaeological authorities, and they said, "Hey, we think we found remains of a sunken ancient boat." So they went out there, excavated. Sure enough, that's what it was. A lot of interesting things about that boat, the way it's constructed, different kind of woods in it and so forth. The reason they call it the Jesus boat is because they found nails, pottery, and some Roman coins in and around this boat that verify its time period, that it was a 1st century boat. So there's no way to know if Jesus ever went out in this boat or if it was Peter's boat or anything, but it shows us, amazingly, remains of a preserved boat from their time. So this may have been kind of a typical size, shape, and construction of the boats they used. So it's an amazing artifact from that period of time. So it's called the Jesus boat. And if you want to see some good, really good photographs of that and read the other details on it, just Google Jesus boat, and that will come up and you can read all the details on it.
What was all the green stuff on the picture?
Okay, all of this?
Yeah. Well, the green on the right.
Yeah, I think this was like a simulated display of water, like a shore or something, and of course this is the frame that it's on. And it's really neat the way they've got that suspended and the way they've got the lighting and the display, because it kind of gives you a sense of the water, like it's kind of like it's in water. So it's really interesting. I wish the photos were better, but they weren't. Did you take any photos of that? I guess I didn't find your photos in the hard drive. So anyway, we'll just use my lousy photo of it. So on that morning, when these guys fished all night, didn't catch anything, may look something like this. And if you picture in your mind, these guys would have been just, you know, right in here, not far out there. This may be 100 yards offshore, not far.
Carson, is this, the Galilee, is it salt water or fresh?
No, it's fresh water.
That's what I was thinking.
Yeah. The Jordan feeds it, and then it runs out of Jordan in the north end, and Jordan out the south end. So it's just a freshwater, you know, freshwater lake. And even today, there's abundant fish in there. You know, a lot of life. They fish in there. You know, it's kind of a, it's not a lot of commercial fishing, but they fish there. So.
What about the terrain? Is it? Do you have around that area? Do you have trees and shrubs and stuff, or is it
on the west side, which we were on? There's areas of forest, and there are a lot of trees, a lot of shrubs, a lot of vegetation. There's pasture, you know, lands. It's all real hilly. In fact, the photo doesn't do it justice, but these hills over there, I mean, they're mountains over there. They're really, really high mountains all the way around it. But on the east side, and you can tell this when you're looking across there, it's just barren. It's desert. It's like, you know, the Sea of Galilee or the Jordan is a dividing line. On the west side, on the Israel side, it's green. You know, there's forest and a lot of pastures and farms and fields, pastures, all those kind of things. You look across on the other side, it's just bare. It looks like Utah or somewhere, you know, just desolate. So it's interesting how the contrast between just the sides of that lake. And kind of up here, this would sort of be part of the Golan Heights up here, kind of the southern part of that. But anyway, on that morning, the shore of Galilee may have looked something like this. And this is what the shores look like. They're that kind of a gravelly, dark basalt gravel. It wasn't a sandy, you know, beach type shore. It would have looked like this. It's kind of what it looks like all around it. There in Galilee. But it's an interesting, a lot of interesting contrast there about in and around Galilee and the whole area there. And you know, you get the sense there when you're there. And it can be kind of overwhelming. You stand there and you're thinking, I'm seeing what they saw. Because when I look across this lake, it looked just like it did then. You know, it hasn't changed that much. Man.
That's what I was going to ask you. Was for
about,
y'all to be there
yeah,
and to be standing in the area where you said that Jesus lived,
yeah,
and then to be standing there on that shore. I can't even imagine how y'all felt. I mean, it had to have been just so overwhelming.
It is pretty overwhelming.
To think that you were standing right there where Jesus probably stood.
Yeah. And you know, what you're looking at is what they looked at every day. It's where they grew up. It's where they lived. These same mountains over there. When they got up in the morning and they watched the sunrise, and they're looking at the same thing I'm looking at now. So yeah, it just, man, you talk about make the Bible come to life, man. It just really makes it real. So yeah, it's a little overwhelming. It sure can be. I mean, you can tell it's been what, 3 years ago, and boy.
When you're with a group, walking and seeing things like that, I mean, can you tell from other people? Are they, you know, really affected?
Oh yeah, because you know, most of the time, like when you're with any group, and you know, tour groups. I mean, you get to know everybody, and everybody's talking, and you know, chit chatting. But there are certain places you go, and it's just quiet. You know, nobody says anything because you're all thinking the same thing. You know, Amen. This is what it was like then. This is just like, you think about the Bible stories and just like what we're talking about now. Jesus and Peter and these other men. This is what it looked like. This is what it felt like. The smell of the water smelled the same. The smell of the plants and the smells were the same. It was probably a lot more fishy because they were, catching a lot of fish. But the day we were there, it was cold, and so you think, those guys were out here, and it was cold, and a lot of times when they were out there working and fishing and so on like that. So it really kind of thinks so yeah, there's times when it affects everybody the same, and just nobody says it. So it really makes it real. So that's where we are. When morning was now come, Jesus stood on the shore, but the disciples knew not that it was Jesus. Then Jesus saith unto them, Children, have ye any meat? They answered him, No. And he said unto them, Cast the net on the right side of the ship, and ye shall find. They cast therefore, and now they were not able to draw it in for the multitude of fishes. Now, if they were using the fishing method of where they anchored their boats in a line offshore, and they let their nets down on the shore side, hoping to run the fish into the nets so they can haul the nets in and catch the fish. If that's the method they were using to catch fish, their boats would have been pointed north then with the shore to their left. And so for this stranger on the shore to tell them, well, have you caught anything? No. And here's another thing, I'll throw in this detail. It wasn't that unusual for somebody on the shore to come up and ask, hey, have you caught anything? No. Or yes, or whatever. Because a lot of times they would have people on the shore that could tell where the fish were. Maybe the guys in the boat couldn't. The guys over here, they could tell where the fish were. This went along with people maybe up higher. They were watching. They would talk to the guys that were, would go into the water, drive the fish, and so forth. So it was kind of teamwork there. So it wasn't all that unusual for somebody on the shore to say, hey, have you caught anything? It'd be just like, anybody coming along, you see guys out there fishing, hey, did you catch anything? No. Now, this stranger on the shore gives them an absurd set of instructions. If they were using this fishing method, where they had their net off the left side of the boat, toward the shore, waiting for the fish to come in from the shallows so they could catch it, to tell them to then take their net and throw it over on the right side of the boat would have been absurd, because that's not the way they fished. They weren't going to run any fish from out there into this side and catch it. So, but they did it anyway. These guys had to have remembered by now. They had to have remembered, about 3.5 years ago when Jesus said the same thing. Did you caught anything? No. Well, go out into the deep and let your net down. We fished all night, haven't caught anything. Go out in the deep part and let your net down and you'll catch. Nets were breaking. They had to call the other guys with their boats to come out there and help them. So they had to, some things had to have been clicking in their minds by now about what was going on and who this might be. Therefore that disciple whom Jesus loved, that was John who was writing this, saying unto Peter, It's the Lord. Now when Simon Peter heard that it was the Lord, he girded his fisher's coat unto him, for he was naked. That didn't mean he didn't have anything on, it just mean he wasn't wearing his, his outer garments and so forth. They didn't go around naked like we think they did. And did cast himself into the sea. And the other disciples came in a little ship, for they were not far from land, but as it were 200 cubits, dragging the net with the fishes. So, see, this shows us that the other disciples, they did have other boats, so it's very possible that that's the fishing method they were using. They had the other boats, they were in a line out there with their nets and so forth. Now, Peter, now how did John know that it was the Lord? Was he guessing? Or maybe he was a little quicker at putting the clues together, and he just said, it's got to be him. It's the Lord. It's got to be him. Peter, of course, impulsive Peter. And we can understand by this point what all he's been through. And he just grabs his coat and jumps in. He's not going to wait to drag the net in. All of a sudden, Peter, who just that evening before said, you know, I'm going fishing. We're all going with you. Now all of a sudden, he doesn't care anything about fish. Because he gets it. He's beginning to get it. He's beginning to understand it. He doesn't care anything about fish. I don't think he really cared anything about fish anymore anyway. But he jumps in and swims to the shore because he knows it's the Lord. He wants to get there. And they brought the net with fishes. As soon as they were come to land, they saw a fire of coals there, and fish laid thereon, and bread. Jesus saith unto them, Bring of the fish which ye have now caught. Simon Peter went up and drew the net to land, full of great fishes, 153. And for all there were so many, yet was not the net broken. So an amazing thing, a miracle catch of fish that happened here. You know, what about the bread and the fish? There have been a lot of different, lessons and all kind of things about the bread and fish. You know what I think it means? I think it means it was bread and fish. These men had been fishing all night. They were hungry, and Jesus had a meal for them. This also ties in with what they knew of the kingdom provision. If there was any sign here to them in this, bread and fish prepared, it was to remind them of the things of the kingdom and the promises of God, of the kingdom provision that He would provide for them. Now, we think, okay, where did Jesus get the bread and the fish? A lot of times we think, well, He just did a miracle and materialized it out of thin air. And I'd never really, up until a week or two ago when I was studying this and putting this together, the thought struck me, why do we think that He just materialized it out of thin air? We know He could, but I thought, what if He didn't? What if He did what would have been just the normal thing to do? What if He had gone to Capernaum and bought it in the market? What if He had gone to the fish market and bought the fish there? What if He'd gone to the bread, maybe the bakers, where you could buy bread? What if He'd gone and bought it? What if Jesus had gone to Capernaum, where He was well known, and walked through the streets? What if He went to the market and bought the things there? He may very well have done just exactly that. Apparently, if He did, nobody recognized Him there. But it'd be, it's something interesting to think about. We always want to apply some supernatural solution to things we see, and there were a lot of supernatural things that happened. But not always. Sometimes God just works through normal, everyday means. He could have done that then. Okay, let's go ahead. We're about out of time. Jesus saith unto them, Come and dine. And none of the disciples durst ask Him, Who art thou? Knowing that it was the Lord. So, we're finding kind of an intriguing thing here in that Jesus would appear to people that knew Him well at times after His resurrection, but He was unrecognizable. And I wonder why. Did He deliberately, kind of disguise Himself? Or I wonder, was it so nobody else would recognize Him? I wonder why. What was it different about Him that they didn't really recognize Him? It'd be interesting to know. I guess we can ask. Get to heaven. Jesus then cometh and taketh bread and giveth them, and fish likewise. This is now the third time that Jesus showed Himself to His disciples after that He was risen from the dead. So when they had dined, Jesus saith to Simon Peter, Simon, son of Jonas, lovest thou me more than these? And I think the these he's referring to there was the other disciples. Because remember, one of the last things Peter had said to Jesus was, I don't care if everybody else denies you, if everybody else turns tail and run. Not me, I won't. I'll stick with you. I don't care if I have to go to prison. Even if I have to die for you, I will. And then Jesus told him, Peter, tonight before the rooster crows you're going to deny me 3 times before the rooster crows in the morning. And we know that happened. So I think this is probably Jesus reminding him of that, but showing Peter a lot of mercy and you know, letting him know that he was forgiven. And this is important, we have to remember, because this wasn't just Peter reacting out of fear. And Peter understood this, I think, afterwards, of what he had done. He had committed like the sin of sins in walking contrary to God, because he had treated God as though he was not his God. Because Peter knew. He knew who Jesus was. He knew he was the Son of God. He knew he was the Messiah. He knew he was the Savior and Redeemer. And so he knew that. He was sure of that. Not just because he believed the Word, believed what Jesus said, but Jesus even testified the Spirit of God had revealed it to him. So he knew it. But in spite of what he knew, he walked contrary to God, denied him 3 times. And so this is most of the reason why Jesus said these things to Peter and why he did 3 times. He saith unto him, Yea, Lord, thou knowest that I love thee. He said unto him, Feed my lambs. Now you notice the difference here. Lambs, he says, feed my lambs here. And later he says, feed my sheep. We'll talk about that in a second. This will be kind of the wrap-up, the takeaway on this. He said to him again the second time, Simon, son of Jonas, lovest thou me? He said unto him, Yea, Lord, thou knowest that I love thee. He said unto him, Feed my sheep. And he saith unto him the third time, Simon, son of Jonas, lovest thou me? Peter was grieved because he said unto him the third time, Lovest thou me? And he said unto him, Lord, thou knowest all things. Thou knowest that I love thee. Jesus saith unto him, Feed my sheep. So, why did Jesus tell Peter to feed his lambs and his sheep? Why the difference? Why lambs and then sheep? Number of things. We're just going to look at 2, focus on 2. These were, for one thing, time indicators to Peter that he would have a job to do that would extend over a significant period of time. Because number one, Jesus told him, feed my lambs. Now, lambs are, you know, little sheep. Peter was the apostle to the circumcision, we know that. Peter's main ministry and focus from the time Jesus called him out until the time he died was to the believing remnant of Israel. He ministered to the believers of Israel. Peter never really had any ministry or anything to do with the body of Christ, made up of Jew and Gentile, that, you know, was Paul's ministry. Peter pretty much he stayed in Jerusalem until he, you know, had to leave because of persecution. He pretty much stayed with Jewish people. He spent some time in what had been ancient Babylon among the Jews that were still up there and so forth. And that was his ministry. So his office and his job never changed. And that was to minister to the nation of Israel, the believing remnant of Israel, and to try to, you know, reach those unbelieving of the nation of Israel and, you know, bring them into the believing remnant. That was his job to do. And Jesus is showing him by 2 time indicators here that that would extend over a period of time. So he said, feed my lambs, those who are newly come in, teach them, tend to them, and the word feed there has more than just give food to. It means the whole, like, take care of, tend to them, watch over them, teach them, feed them, and everything they need, provide what they need. And we know Peter did that. He led out of that. He was the leader of the believers there pretty much during his lifetime. Then when the Lord said, after feed my lambs, feed my sheep, then that meant also take care of them when they see that they grow from lambs to sheep, and then after they become sheep, make sure you take care of them then. As the believing remnant of Israel, they would be the little flock. If you remember, that's what Jesus called the group of believers that He called out, the little flock, the believing remnant of Israel that was prophesied all the way back through, we find it a lot in Isaiah and Jeremiah and Ezekiel and several of the other prophets talking about the remnant that would be called out and go into the kingdom. So this is Peter's job. And this was a lot to do with why Jesus told him to feed his sheep, take care of the believing remnant. Continue to do the things that you've been called to do and set to do. So it was important here that not just do we see Jesus forgiving Peter and kind of letting him off the hook for his denial of Jesus, but also He's giving him the kind of his initial reinforcement to keep on doing what I set before you to do. And that's what he did. This was his orders, his commission. And he continued to do it for the rest of his life. The letters he wrote, 1st and 2nd Peter, they're specifically to the little flock, the believing remnant of Israel, and they're instructions for them that will teach them things they need to know to endure the tribulation to come, the 70th week. Jesus goes on to say this. He says, Verily, verily, I say unto thee, when thou wast young, thou girdest thyself and walkest whither thou wouldest. But when thou shalt be old, thou shalt stretch forth thy hands, and another shall gird thee and carry thee whither thou wouldest not. This spake he, signifying by what death he should glorify God. And when he had spoken this, he saith unto him, Follow me. Now, here's a second time indicator Jesus gives Peter. He tells him, when you were young, went where you wanted to, dress yourself and so on. He says, when thou shalt be old. So this told Peter right here, Peter, you will grow old. So Peter knew. Now, we know the stories later on in the book of Acts. Excuse me. When Peter was in jail, you remember, after Herod had killed James, John's brother James, had arrested Peter and thrown him in prison and was intending to have him killed after the Roman festival of Easter. Peter was in jail, chained between two guards. Do you remember what Peter was doing? Was he chewing his nails and wringing his hands? He was sleeping between the two guards. See, I think Peter remembered. He wasn't afraid. He knew that whatever happened, he wasn't going to be killed, because Jesus had told him, Peter, when you're old, this is how you're going to die. You're going to stretch forth your hands, and in this way, by this death, you'll glorify God. So Peter knew that he was going to get old, and that the Romans would crucify him, and in his death, he would glorify God. He knew he would die a martyr's death. So he knew that he had years to live until, he was old, and then his course would come to an end, and he would die a martyr's death. So he understood those things. So these are a couple of important time markers that Jesus gave to Peter that kind of sort of reinforced and helped him face some of the challenges that he did as he went on through his life and did some of the things he did. All right, I don't know if I ended there. Yeah, I guess I did. All right. Now, I thought I had I guess I did. Well, he said, follow me. Here's kind of the takeaway. If you remember the rest of the story, I thought I put that in here in the PowerPoint, but I didn't. So we'll just kind of paraphrase it because it's about time to close for tonight. Jesus began to walk away, the disciples following, and Peter following. He said, he pointed to John. He said, well, Lord, what about him? What's he going to do? And basically, Jesus said unto him, don't worry about what he's going to do. You follow me. So here's kind of the takeaway on this. There are other things too, but we can end it with this. Whatever God gives us to do, that's what we need to do. Whatever we're equipped to do, whatever skills we have to do. Earlier we were talking about some of the psychology things, about the different personality types, whether you're an introvert or an extrovert, and different things like that. And we're all equipped differently for different things. So whatever the Lord sets before you to do, and whatever He equips you to do, just do that. Don't worry about what anybody else is doing. Don't worry about what other people tell you they think that you should do or shouldn't do, or how you should do it, or any of that kind of stuff. That's why all this stuff we're studying is important, because this is all components of our spiritual growth in learning everything from how to rightly divide the Word, understanding Israel's program, our program, the body of Christ, and how all these things tie together, and how to accurately understand the Bible so that we're not confused, and we know what instructions are for us, and we have a clear idea and a growing idea of how to follow those things. And we're not just stumbling around in the dark, but we're steadily growing, steadily learning, and becoming mature and perfected saints. That's why all this is important. So we learn what God has for us to do, and just do that. Follow Him. Now, that's not to say we're all Lone Rangers, because we're not. The Lord doesn't have any Lone Rangers. Everything God has as part of His plan and purpose for us, He has for us to function together as a body. That's why we're called the body of Christ. Different members, all the body. Every member is just as important as every other member. Like Paul said, eye can't say to the foot, I don't need you, and ear can't say to the hand, I don't need you. They're all interconnected, and they're all mutually dependent. And in spite of whatever different parts, different offices, different jobs we have, we can have confidence, move forward, and whatever the Lord has for us to do, just do that, and it will all get accomplished. So, some interesting things about Capernaum. This will wrap up this series in John. I'm working on some pretty interesting stuff for next week. It's kind of one of those studies that begins and it just kind of expands and expands, so I'm trying to keep it as concise as I can. So we will probably get started on it next week, and we'll just kind of see where it goes. So that'll be some good stuff, and this will kind of tie in a little bit of the stuff we talked about last week, some current events and so forth. So all right, anybody got anything tonight, any comments or anything? All right, let's have a word of prayer and we'll close for tonight. Father, we thank you again for